ready to go, wound up like a spring. So what do I say? Again, here we are again. Fantastic to see you all for one of our global events, and you know, the vision we have in this new whatever world we're living in is that the cloud sits above us, and who knows who's in the cloud, and we drop down in various geographies, and we're delighted today to be dropping down into the USA. And we're absolutely delighted to connect with our USA colleagues. And as the concept of Global is that we fly around in the internet or the ether, drop down in certain geographies. So we sometimes drop down in Australia. We're going to drop down in other parts of Europe in the next quarter. And today we're dropping down into the USA, as I say, and on the ground in the USA, we have a lot of good colleagues. Graham, do you want to just thank our colleagues who are part of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've had, you know, great assistance from Mark, who I mentioned before, Mark Coates, and his great Thirsty Thursdays. Danny, it was great to connect with you, and thanks for your previous presentation. And Alyssa, of course. Good to see you, Alyssa, and Valerie, who we heard from. And of course, we got Dave Bjork, who's going to be speaking later after we've heard from Sebastian.
We're always up for people.
Oh, and Lauren, of course. Lauren, hello down there.
Oh, Lauren down there. Yeah, fantastic, Lauren.
Great to see you.
We're always up for, you know, good colleagues on the ground to connect with us, and we can put on one of these special iCloud or cloud events above you, wherever you would like to be. And remember, our goal of these sessions is to entertain, engage, and inform. It's part of our mantra, and we've got a fantastic lineup today. We start the show with two very interesting, very different, but very fascinating speakers, which we're really pleased to have. Then we've got four of our colleagues presenting what they're doing as another form of communication and entertainment. And then we move into our final session, which is the getting to know you, mixing people around. And we know that business is done not just by transactional activity, but it's also done by relationships. So our goal is to build and create the right chemistry for building the relationships. And that has been what we've done, because this is about the 100th, I reckon this is the 115th show we've done since COVID came. So my goodness, we've been active, trying to keep everyone buoyant during these times. But my first guest I'd like to introduce is Sebastian. And Sebastian, fantastic to see you, man. And maybe you can introduce yourself and say what you do. Sebastian, welcome.
Sure. Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Graham, for the invitation. I'm Sebastian Brunemeier. I'm a scientist by training, focused on the basic biology of aging, molecular biology, and biochemistry. And over the last several years, I've been doing biotech management and venture capital, most recently for Apollo Ventures.
Fantastic. And I mean, so you're into this. You work for Apollo Ventures. You are a scientist, are you? And what led you maybe quickly into the venture capital world?
Yeah, it was always a fascination with the intersection of business and science. I noticed, you know, having toiled in the lab for a long time, that, you know, you can be a genius scientist, as I work with a couple, and still not have much impact result, right? A colleague and friend of mine, Steve Horvath, once said that the purpose of a scientific journal article is to collect dust, and if you don't actually translate it, nothing happens. So that frustrated me a bit, and I also just love learning new things from people at the cutting edge of their field. So VC was obviously a good next step.
Fantastic. And did you drop into that straight from a postdoc, or how did you go into it?
It was kind of a circuitous route. I was working for a family office in London who was interested in investing in biotech, and I was recruited by James Pyre, who you know, who was founding Apollo at the time. We were at a conference in London hosted by The Economist on aging, and we hit it off, and the rest is history.
Oh, fantastic. So you've got a few slides to show us. And I mean, you got into aging, and which is to many of us a mystery. And I just give as a framework, you know, one of the things I worked on for a long time was retinoids, which stopped you getting wrinkling, but or wrinkly. But I wouldn't describe it as an anti-aging thing. So maybe I think a lot of us are going to be really interested in what you've got to say. So you're calling this Geroscience and longevity. So maybe you could just go through your slides, and I'll ask you a few nudging questions as we go along.
Sure, sounds good. All right, so let's see here. The disclosures, these are companies I consult for, have equity in, and I'll be making some forward-looking statements, so there's that disclaimer. The outline, I'll tell you a bit about my own background, a very brief, heavily abridged primer on geroscience, which is this field concerned with the biology of aging and how aging actually causes disease, and then some time for Q&A. So my background is in the sciences, master's at University of Amsterdam, molecular neuroscience, working on Parkinson's, BCL2 family, also master's in business management for the life sciences, which purportedly teaches you how to run a biotech company. I learned that the only way to learn that is to actually do it and get your hands dirty, as many of you know. And I was in the PhD program or DPhil program at Oxford, working again on the biochemistry of aging, on proteostasis and cellular senescence in particular, and in a joint program with the Scripps Research Institute as well. So I made the transition into biotech through Apollo Ventures, which is the first and largest venture capital fund focused on aging and age-related disease, specifically therapeutics. And we are just closing a $100 million fund right now, focusing on company formation. And the current managing partner of that fund is Jens Eckstein, who many of you know, who was running SR1, which is GSK's venture arm, which has just spun out from GSK recently. And via Samsara, I spun out a company, or via Apollo, I spun out a company recently called Samsara Therapeutics in Oxford, which is developing small molecules that enhance this process of autophagy, or self-eating, or this cellular self-renewal process that is turned on by fasting and by exercise. And we're raising a $10 million Series A round right now. So if you or someone you know is interested in investing, please send me a message on LinkedIn. Another company I launched out of the Scripps Research Institute is called Cyclone Therapeutics, developing mimetics of the integrated stress response.
Right.
So one of the companies that I'm involved with that I'm most excited about is called Cambrian Biopharma, which is a little bit in stealth mode, but basically we're a diversified R&D company focused on the biology of aging, and specifically these molecular mechanisms known as the hallmarks of aging, these cellular biochemical processes that cause aging, and when you intervene them in animals, it actually extends their healthy lifespan. So the model there, it's not a limited partnership VC fund, it's actually a C Corp with subsidiaries, and it's based on the model of Bridge Bio, but it's attempting to be Bridge Bio, but for aging, whereas Bridge Bio focuses on rare disease.
So those who don't know that, just tell us more. Is it's a shell that has money in and builds companies out of it? Is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly. And Bridge Bio is, we're basically copying the playbook of Bridge Bio. They launched some years ago out of Third Rock, Neil Kumar and others, who noticed that there was this backlog of research in academia around rare genetic diseases, Mendelian diseases. And that was before it was sort of a hot commodity in pharma and, you know, the gene therapy boom of recent years. So they saw this underappreciated opportunity, built up a bunch of companies. One of their most prominent is called iDose, and they listed, and Bridge Bio, I think, trades for about 3 or 4 billion on NASDAQ today, and they're very impressive. So we really love their model, and their overall model is based on the work of Andrew Lo and colleagues at MIT, who's actually a professor of financial engineering who lost family members to cancer. And so he turned his attention to how to solve some of the incentive problems and organizational and funding problems in pharma. And he published this interesting paper, Commercializing Biomedical Research Through Securitization Techniques, in Nature Biotech. And the idea is that you have a diversified portfolio of many shots on goal that are not correlated. So pharmas usually have their own therapeutic areas that they're interested in, and risk seems to correlate across those areas. Whereas if you take multiple shots on goal with mechanisms that are unrelated, and you get fancy with securitization of that company, including raising debt, you can actually almost guarantee, in his view, at least one success that would justify the model. So BridgeBio seems to be proving that out, but we'll see if other companies like Cambrian are able to realize his vision. Within Cambrian, we launched fairly recently in late 2019. We have about 7 assets in the pipeline now, science coming from some top institutions. We've got about 20 full-time people, about 30 people within our portfolio company subsidiaries. We raised about 60 million so far this year, backed by some prominent names: Christian Angermeyer, who many of you will know in the UK ecosystem, Steve Jurvetson from DFJ, who backed most of Elon Musk's companies, Joe Lonsdale from Palantir, and a colleague of Thiel, and some prominent Wall Street investors who I cannot disclose. But anyway, so that's a company. It's a little bit in stealth mode, but one to keep your eye on.
Very good. And
one of our subsidiaries is called Sensei Biotherapeutics. And this is a phage-based vaccine platform. So you've heard of phage display. There was a Nobel awarded to Greg Winter a couple of years ago at Cambridge about this basic premise of using bacteriophage, which are viruses that only infect bacteria, to display certain antigens or molecules in a really high throughput, sort of evolutionarily determined way. And so we have reapplied that sort of principle to vaccines, primarily cancer vaccines, but also infectious diseases. And so without going into too much detail, I would just direct you to the website, which covers some of the science, but we have some, pretty promising phase 1 data. We have a partial response in a patient who did not respond to PD-1 inhibitors, drugs well tolerated, and Bloomberg reports a planned IPO sometime in the first half of next year. And I'm really, really excited about this company. It's a little tangentially related to our normal theme of aging, but one reason we're excited about it is because this platform, one of the tumor antigens that we've identified, is present in the majority of cancer types. And so this could be a really broad spectrum approach, kind of like checkpoint inhibition is for many types of cancer.
One question, Sebastian. I mean,
sure.
Cambrian was only founded in 19, and the IPO of Sensei is 2021. Did you come in a late round?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's kind of a long story, and credit is due to my colleague and co-founder James Pyer for finding this really, really incredible set of assets, but it was a little bit distressed, and we needed to restructure the cap table. And that company had been operating for about 10 years or so, a lot of the IP coming out of Hopkins, but the management was a little not properly focused, and so we came in, did a little bit of a turnaround, and now it's on a really nice trajectory. And it attracted the likes of Sam Broder, who was the head of the National Cancer Institute, and the rest of the team is really cool too. So definitely check out the website if you're interested in immune oncology.
Fantastic. Next one, my friend.
Yeah, right. So getting into aging, there's a demographic crisis called the Silver Tsunami. Demographers and economists will remark that demography is destiny. It's the single most important factor in macroeconomic outcomes, and so we would be unwise to ignore it. Just to visualize this, in 2010, you can see countries in red where over 20% of the population is older than age 65. And if you fast forward a bit to 2050, most of the world is aged, and this is going to put a lot of pressure on government budgets, which are already not in great shape. This is driven by the baby boomers and then the millennials coming in a little after. You can see the rise in the dependency ratios, the ratio of working to non-working members of the population. Japan is by far the worst, and they're going to sort of be a canary in the coal mine, but Western Europe is not far behind. So I often ask people in thinking about aging, what is the main risk factor for lung cancer? And most people would say, well, cigarette smoking or tobacco, of course, but this is actually a trick question because it's technically aging. Smoking cigarettes is necessary but not sufficient. You need to allow the passage of time to do the damage that would allow a tumor to develop. So immune senescence, for example, the accumulation of multiple mutations within tumor suppressors, the failure of immune surveillance, tumor anti-cancer immune surveillance, et cetera, and a failure of senescence and apoptosis. So really, really aging is one of the main risk factors there. You can see the risk of disease rises exponentially as a function of age, such that even if we were to cure one of the major killers, such as cancer, completely, every type of cancer, full stop, on a population level, that would only give us about 2 or 3 years of extended healthy lifespan in aggregate. So it won't solve any of the public health problems or the government budget problems with respect to population aging just to cure one of the major killers. We have to actually extend the period of healthy life. So that's the goal of geroscience, which is to extend health span. Everybody is on board with this concept. And if you extend health span, you're likely going to extend overall lifespan as well.
Is the goal, if you just go back one slide, I don't know whether you can go back one slide. If you go back to that, is the goal to start dosing your therapeutic your therapeutic between 0 and 40? So that you dose it, because I mean, it's a bit like, I don't know, prepping the immune response or yeah, prophylactic treatment, whatever you want to call it. I mean, you've got to start dosing it, you've got to dose it from 20 onwards.
For sure. Earlier is better. This is what we see in the mouse studies. Damage accumulates from day one. We're accumulating, for example, DNA mutations from day one. So earlier is better. But that won't really work within the current regulatory framework, where you have to develop a drug that addresses or prevents a specific disease, age-related or otherwise. So the model that we use at Apollo and at Cambrian and elsewhere is we look for drugs that will address an existing disease, such as cancer, but that can also be label expanded or pivoted into other age-related diseases, and then you can knock them down one by one. And eventually, we anticipate that regulators will be open to the premise of prophylaxis. So if you have a drug that's so safe, you can actually give it before the onset of disease, given certain risk factors like we have with statins or with metformin, and with Amarin's fish oil as well. So we're optimistic that eventually that will be possible, but it's a very high bar for safety, as we're seeing today with the vaccines, right? If you're going to dose someone who's generally healthy, you have to have an exceptionally high bar for safety. But we found a couple molecules that do fit that profile. So,
sorry, next one.
Sure, great. Yeah, that's the premise of geroscience, to extend healthy lifespan. Everyone's on board with that. And I'd also submit that the most valuable and impactful drug of all time will be a drug that extends healthy lifespan. So prior to, the mid 20th century, antibiotics were the greatest medical revolution in history. And yet, around that time, before the principle was proven, most physicians and most scientists did not believe that it would be possible to have a chemical antibiotic, what they called a chemotherapeutic at the time. And then the sulfa antibiotics came around, and penicillin, and finally, the entire paradigm changed. So when there is a drug that we can show extends healthy lifespan in humans, as we have shown with many molecules in animals like mice, then that will be a watershed moment, and it will expand a totally new area, therapeutic area in drug discovery. So the surprise, not a lot of people realize this, but we already have drugs that extend healthy lifespan in mice and across species up to about 20% with no negative side effects. But the human clinical trials in health span have not been conducted for several reasons. We're working on that. But some of these molecules have already been approved for other diseases. Metformin and rapamycin are two very common examples, and there are a handful of others, and I'll get into that. So this geroscience advancement is a medical revolution waiting to happen on the scale of antibiotics. So what are some of these examples? Metformin, I've mentioned, that's sort of the first line of defense in diabetes and metabolic syndrome. It reduces the synthesis, the gluconeogenesis of sugar in the blood and has other interesting properties. We have epidemiological data from humans in a large UK study that it actually extends the lifespan of diabetics beyond that of healthy non-diabetic age-matched controls, which is a phenomenal result because diabetics have severely reduced lifespan in other circumstances. So metformin is actually more than compensating for the decrement to lifespan and health that having type 2 diabetes incurs. Another interesting molecule is rapamycin. This is an immune suppressant, very interesting natural product, and is used for transplantation of organs and certain cancers. It turns out that it extends lifespan in mice, and it was one of the first molecules shown to do so. And one of the companies we created, Apollo, called Aovian Pharma, is developing new analogs of rapamycin that are have a better side effect profile. Another is the enhancement of autophagy. So I mentioned this process where cells break down their internal components and then they rebuild them. Cellular recycling mechanism, for which a Nobel Prize was awarded a few years ago. And one of the companies we've built is called Samsara Therapeutics, seeking to enhance that process. And there have been a bunch of other companies since then seeking to enhance this process of autophagy because it extends healthy lifespan in animals. And it also works in basically every animal model of disease you care to check. And it also makes it harder for the animals to get fat. So there's appeal to that. Another interesting one is heterochronic bone marrow transplant. So you take the bone marrow hematopoietic stem cells from young animals and you transplant them into an old mouse and it rejuvenates that mouse. Also cognitive function, which you wouldn't expect rejuvenating the bone marrow, but it indicates the connection between the immune system and brain function and neuroinflammation. Another classic that many people are familiar with is caloric restriction. Eating less or various types of fasting. This has been known for about 100 years. This guy, Clive McKay at Yale, showed this in mice about a century ago, but it's been known across the millennia to be salutary. That's hard to do, so we're looking for drugs that will mimic some or all of those benefits. Another is senescent cell clearance, which I'll get into in a minute. You have these zombified cells that secrete a pro-inflammatory cytokine milieu that accelerates the pace of aging throughout the body. Another one, one of my personal favorites is repair of a leaky gut or gut barrier permeability. So Hippocrates and Elie Metchnikoff, the Nobel laureate in immunology, said death begins in the gut. And we see this across species, that the intestine is a highly proliferative tissue. And if something goes wrong there, you get local inflammation, systemic inflammation, and gut-brain axis problems. And so there is a rather under the radar area of research where you can administer certain therapeutics that repair the leaky gut and extend lifespan in mice. And then finally, the sort of androgenic, anabolic, axis of insulin and growth hormone. Those are necessary for life, but they're also accelerants of aging within this paradigm of antagonistic pleiotropy, where genetics that are good for you when you're young turn out to be deleterious as you age, and growth hormone and insulin are examples of that. So if you mutate the growth hormone receptor, the insulin receptor in animals, it extends their healthy lifespan, delays the pace of aging. And there's actually a human population in Latin America that has a loss of function mutation in the growth hormone receptor, and they're highly resistant to cancer. They're dwarves. They're very little, but they don't get cancer. So anyway, these are just a handful of the interventions that we know of today that extend healthy lifespan in mice.
Sebastian, I mean, to be honest, when I look at this, it blows my whole concept of pathology away. You know, because I as a pathologist, it just blows you off, blows you away, and because you start looking at diseases you just try and it reframes your perspective on a disease. But I'm sitting here and I'm just thinking, my goodness, what's a clinical trial look like that? I mean, what did you say? The mouse, increases their healthy lifespan. If that's the goal, how do you create a clinical study with a primary endpoint of increasing its healthy lifespan?
Sure. Yeah, we get this question a lot. We don't actually plan to have the primary endpoint as lifespan quite yet. We do what everyone else does, which is treat an existing disease and then label expand into other diseases. And the fundamental aspect of drugs that slow or reverse the damage of aging is that they will work for multiple age-related diseases. And so they're pipelines in a pill, so to speak. And so we're not so ambitious as to plan, you know, a 5 or 10-year study for lifespan, although there are a couple of groups contemplating this. One is called the TAME study, led by Nir Barzilai and others, a metformin study where they're enrolling a couple thousand patients. It's already been cleared by FDA. They just don't have the capital to run it because no one can make money on a generic like metformin. They're looking at a surrogate sort of endpoint, which is in addition to all of the blood biomarkers that read out on aging and DNA methylation, the Horvath clock and other surrogates, they're actually looking at the latency factor. So between one disease and another disease. So when you're aging and you get one condition, say cancer or arthritis or something else, you're actually more likely to get another condition shortly thereafter. So when one system breaks down, and it speaks to the unity of the entire system. You know, most physicians are used to looking at specific tissues or organ systems, but it's all interconnected. So when you get one disease, you're likely to get another one shortly after. So they're actually looking at the latency period between one disease onset and another as a surrogate for the pace of aging. So that could be, I think that's a 3 or 4 year study. So that could be within reason, but we're not trying to do that quite yet. We're just still going after specific diseases.
We need to wrap up in 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah.
I knew this would happen because it's such an interesting subject. But
For sure.
Carry on, Sebastian.
So, long story short, geroscience is an emerging field. The NIH is backing it with their Trans Geroscience Interest Group. It's grown rapidly in the last 20 years because of the basic research. And that research, if you want a snapshot, you could read this paper, The Hallmarks of Aging in Cell, which summarizes these molecular mechanisms that cause aging and examples of interventions, genetic and pharmacological, that extend the healthy lifespan in animals. These are some of the companies in the space. You can take a screenshot or come back to this if you're curious, or send me a message on LinkedIn. I'll just call out one of these that got a lot of attention into the field, which is Calico, which is Google or Alphabet's company that partnered with AbbVie, and they've recruited a lot of prominent scientists, but there are many others in the UK. Many of you will know Juvenescence, Jim Mellon, and Greg Bailey's group doing a lot of interesting work as well, and a handful of others. And, you know, just a couple of years ago, 10 years ago when I got into the space, it was pretty much absent of industry, but now they're flooding in, which is great to see. There are some longevity focused investors down here. Apollo and Cambrian are some of them, and there are a handful more. And the traditional investors are interested in this space. So I mentioned cellular senescence. We'll save that for another time, but basically ablating them extends lifespan. In progeric mice, if you ablate senescent cells, it actually rejuvenates the animals. Unity Biotech is the first shot on goal there. Their drug target may not have been the right one, or may not have been the right indication combination, but that's a proof of principle. There's another area, heterochronic parabiosis. You link the circulatory system of young and old mice. They share blood, and the old mouse gets younger, the young mouse gets older. Recently, some researchers have found exercise in a pill, a single protein that recapitulates the physical and cognitive benefits of exercise. So that, look out for that. Bone marrow transplantation, of the rejuvenation of young bone marrow, transplantation of young into old, rejuvenates the immune system and extends healthy lifespan between 12 and 28%. This is a new result. Caloric restriction, I mentioned, many of you will know the Sertris deal with GSK, 720 million in biobucks. People look askance at that, thinking that maybe something wasn't quite right. I actually was in touch with the people at GSK who acquired Certrus because I tried to out-license this IP. And from them, I learned that the deal was actually legit, and they made tens of thousands of analogs and brought several into phase 2. But for political reasons, that program was not continued. So, you know, that should absolve Sinclair and Westphal to some extent for the questions around that deal, because the science is good. And Rafael de Cabo at the NIA has since shown that sirtuin-1 activation extends lifespan by about 10% in mice and makes the animals metabolically younger.
We need to speed up, I think.
Yeah, okay, let's come to conclusion.
I think we maybe should get to the end because time is moving and we want to, I mean,
yes.
Basically you've got loads of things. There's loads of projects out there, isn't there?
There are, and these are some of the interventions. If you're curious, you can reach out to me, and if you want to know more of the science, you can look up a talk I gave a couple of years ago at Oxford on that. So I'll conclude with optimism about the field of longevity biotech, and if anyone is interested in learning more, feel free to reach out to me.
I mean, Sebastian, that is absolutely awesome. I mean, you know, when at the end of these sort of discussions, my whole brain is wanting to, it's doing different things. I think fantastic. Let me just, Graham, I don't know whether you can.
Yeah, we could bring in a quick question from Tom, from
Pessimist. I knew it would be Tom because his brain will be exploding as well. Tom,
optimist to pessimist.
Do you want to bring Tom?
Tom, are you there?
Question.
Tom.
There we go. Yeah. Sebastian, that was mind-blowing, you know, particularly as I'm a silver fox, you know, myself. My question is the science there yet to lengthen telomeres, or is this old hat?
Sure. Yeah, good question. I actually did a Fulbright fellowship on telomere biology, so I'm not making this up. The science is there. If you deliver telomerase TERT by AAV, whole body, into mice, according to Maria Blasco, you get about a 10 to 15% healthy lifespan extension, and it rejuvenates all tissues. And it doesn't, importantly, it doesn't increase cancer incidence if you deliver by AAV, whereas it does increase cancer incidence if you engineer that extra telomerase into the germline, particularly in mice, because mice are prone to cancer. And that's one reason they have cancer, is because mice actually have very long telomeres. And that's one reason why mice are not a very good model for telomere biology, and zebrafish are a favorite of mine. So yeah, telomerase is really, I mean, it is the immortalization protein, right? It's a protein complex that extends the telomeres, these caps at the end of chromosomes. And you cannot have an immortal cell, or even a cell with a long proliferative lifespan, without telomerase. There are rare exceptions like ALT, alternative lengthening of telomeres, but most tumor cells have to turn on telomerase. The germline and most stem cells and some blood cells require telomerase for their proliferation. And so we actually created a company out of UT Southwestern with Jerry Shea, who's one of the world leaders in telomere biology, who actually trained Michael West from Geron. And we're targeting telomerase biology to rejuvenate cells ex vivo, including in the context of T cell therapy and other forms of cell therapy, where that limited proliferation is a major rate limiting step.
Fantastic.
Right. Do you mind taking your share off, actually, and then we'll move on? But that was absolutely fantastic.
That was, I mean, I can't begin to tell you how awesome that was. Let's give you a round of applause. Now, you know, we've got so much to talk to you about, and we need to bring you back another time, because I think we almost need to digest it and come back, because there's so many questions about what is pathology, what is aging, how are you ever going to do it? It's madness. Look at Tom's face. He's gone red. He's gone bright red. He's matching his jumper because he can't work it out. And we're going to change tack now. We're going to change absolute tack. And Sebastian, thanks again. We wish you the best, and come back soon, because we need you. We need you again. But we're going to change tack.